Hello, welcome to OJ Studios. Please enjoy today's chapter of Ghost, by Olivia Julius.
I pulled myself into the narrow vent, the metal walls scraping against my porcelain body with every awkward movement. The tight space was suffocating, the stale air heavy with dust and grime. The baby doll had been right, it was a tight fit, and even my small, fragile frame barely managed to squeeze through. My stiff limbs didn't help, jerking awkwardly as I dragged myself forward. The lacy hem of the dress snagged on the rough edges of the vent, the delicate fabric darkening with streaks of dirt and grease. It clung to my body in uncomfortable folds, making every movement more awkward. Great, I thought bitterly. If I wasn't humiliated enough already, now I'm a filthy porcelain doll in a ruined dress. The dim light from the doll room quickly faded behind me as I crawled deeper into the vent. The further I went, the darker it became, the only sound the faint clink of my porcelain hands and knees scraping against the metal. Dust clung to every surface, coating my small body in a fine layer of gray. It filled the air, clogging wherever counted as my nose and throat now. I tried to cough instinctively, but the sound that came out was hollow and echoing, as though I were choking inside an empty shell. I paused for a moment, pressing my back against the cramped metal walls, and tried to catch my breath, not that I needed to breathe anymore. "This is insane," I muttered, my hollow voice barely audible over the faint hum of air currents in the vent. But I couldn't turn back now. I forced myself forward, inch by inch, ignoring the growing sense of claustrophobia as the vent narrowed even further. My hand slipped on the greasy surface, and the rough metal scratched against the white tights that now clung to my legs, leaving jagged tears in the fabric. The dress was in even worse shape. The frilly hem had been shredded by the jagged edges of the vent, and streaks of black grease and brown dust marred the once pristine pink fabric. I looked less like a porcelain doll and more like a discarded toy that had been dragged through the dirt. "Keep moving," I told myself, pushing away the discomfort. The vent curved sharply ahead, and I struggled to maneuver my stiff limbs around the corner. The tightness of the space made every movement more awkward, and for a moment, I was afraid I'd get stuck. I paused, my small body wedged between the walls, and felt a wave of panic rise in my chest. What if this is it? What if I can't go forward or backward? What if I'm stuck here forever? I clenched my porcelain fists, forcing myself to focus. "No," I said aloud, my voice echoing faintly in the cramped space. "You've made it this far. You're not giving up now." With a sharp twist, I managed to free myself from the corner and continue forward. The vent began to slope slightly upward, and I pushed myself harder, ignoring the growing ache in my fragile joints. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of crawling, I saw a faint light ahead. It wasn't much, just a small, flickering glow, but it was enough to make my heart leap. An exit, I thought, hope surging through me. I dragged myself toward the light, my movements growing faster despite the exhaustion. The air grew slightly fresher, the hum of machinery louder as I approached the end of the vent. When I finally reached the opening, I peered out cautiously, squinting at the bright light beyond. What I saw made my porcelain hands tighten against the metal edges of the vent. It wasn't the outside world. It was another room. And in the center of it stood a familiar figure, Alan Yates, or rather, the ghost who had stolen his body. He was standing by a table, his back turned to me, speaking into a phone. His voice was calm and smooth, but I couldn't make out the words. I gritted my teeth, my frustration bubbling over. So close, I thought. But not close enough. For now, I stayed in the vent, watching and waiting, the faint flicker of hope still burning inside me. I pressed my porcelain hands against the sides of the vent, willing myself to leave the doll's body. I closed my eyes and focused on the familiar pull, the sensation of detachment that I had relied on so many times before. but nothing happened. It was like I was glued to this tiny, fragile body, trapped within its painted frame. Damn it, I muttered, the hollow sound of my voice bouncing faintly off the vent walls. I glanced back at the room, where Alan, the ghost in Alan's body, stood, still engrossed in his phone call. His back was to me, his voice calm and measured, though the exact words were muffled by the hum of machinery in the room. I waited, holding still, my porcelain body stiff and awkward as I remained hidden in the shadows of the vent. My joints ached from crawling, and my once lacy dress hung in tatters, coated with grime. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Alan hung up the phone and left the room, his confident stride carrying him out of sight. The door hissed shut behind him, leaving the space empty and eerily quiet. I waited a few more moments to be sure he was gone, then began pulling myself out of the vent. The jagged edges scraped against my fragile frame, and I winced as I tumbled out onto the floor, landing with a soft clink. The room was stark and utilitarian, lined with shelves and cabinets filled with papers, objects, and strange devices I couldn't begin to identify. But what caught my eye was the desk in the center. On it lay a handwritten journal, its leather cover cracked with age. Something about it felt out of place, as though it didn't belong in this modern, sterile environment. I moved closer, my stiff limbs jerking awkwardly as I climbed onto the chair and leaned over the desk. The front of the journal was unmarked, but when I flipped it open, I froze. The first page was labeled in bold, precise handwriting. How to switch with a living human. My porcelain hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, scanning the detailed instructions. The journal described the ritual in unnerving detail, step by step, how a ghost could force a living human's soul out of their body, trapping it inside an object of their choosing, while the ghost took over the human body completely. It was a process Alan had clearly mastered. I stared at the journal, anger and dread twisting inside me. This was how he had stolen the real Alan Yates' body. This was how he planned to steal Elizabeth's body, and probably William's after that. And this was how he trapped me and the other ghosts, forcing us into these doll bodies, powerless and forgotten. I gritted my teeth, my small fists tightening. Not this time, I muttered. I ripped the page from the journal, the one that explained the ritual in full, and folded it carefully. My small, clumsy fingers struggled with the delicate paper, but I managed to tuck it into the tattered folds of my dress. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing, I wasn't going to let him win. Climbing awkwardly down from the chair, I glanced around the room once more, searching for anything else of use. But the journal seemed to be the key. I shuffled back to the vent, my movements clunky and uneven, and pulled myself inside. The crawl back to the doll room was even worse than before. The page tucked into my dress made it harder to move, and the rough edges of the vent snagged against the already ruined fabric. Dust and grime coated every inch of my body, and by the time I reached the end of the vent, I felt more like a discarded toy than ever. When I emerged into the doll room, the other dolls barely reacted. Their lifeless eyes turned toward me briefly before returning to their strange, jerky routines. The baby doll was sitting near a corner, its round, padded body slumped against the wall. When it saw me, it tilted its head, its painted-on smile oddly sympathetic. "You? Back?" it asked in its halting toddler speak. I nodded, brushing the dust from my ruined dress. "Yeah," I said, my hollow voice tense. "And I found something." The baby doll blinked slowly, its button eyes reflecting the dim light. "What? Find?" I crouched down, pulling the torn page from my dress and holding it out. "This," I said. "It's how he does it. How he switches bodies, how he traps us in these things." The baby doll stared at the page, its round head tilting again. "You? Sure?" "Positive," I said firmly. "And if we can figure out how to reverse it, maybe, just maybe, we can stop him." The baby doll hesitated, its small, padded hands fidgeting in its lap. "Dangerous," it said softly. "He? Find out. He? Mad?" "I don't care," I snapped, standing up and glaring down at it. "He's going to do this to Elizabeth. And if we don't stop him, he's going to keep doing it, over and over, to whoever he wants. The baby doll looked up at me, its painted smile frozen in place, but there was something in its voice, something weary and resigned. "You brave," it said simply. "But hard? Very hard." "I'll figure it out," I said, more to myself than to the baby doll. "I have to. Because if I didn't, no one else would." I stood in the dim light of the doll room, staring down at the baby doll as its button eyes blinked slowly, its round, padded body leaning slightly forward as it spoke. "You swap," it said in its halting toddler-like voice. "Swap with Elizabeth." The words hit me like a brick. "Elizabeth?" I repeated, my hollow voice echoing faintly in the room. "Why her? Why your granddaughter?" The baby doll shifted slightly, its stitched head tilting to the side. "Because Alan's ghost can't be pulled out by us," it explained, its speech slow and deliberate. "Only way you get close. Swap with her. You look human again. Can search. Find way." I stepped back, shaking my porcelain head, the lacy hem of my ruined dress brushing against my legs. "You're asking me to take her body. That's exactly what he's doing, what that thing in Alan's body did to you." The baby doll's painted-on smile didn't falter, but its tone grew quieter, more serious. "Not same," it said softly. "You saving her. If you no stop him, he take her. Forever. Trap her. Like me. Like you. Like all of us." I froze, the weight of its words pressing down on me. "You're saying..." I hesitated, my voice trembling slightly. "You're saying that if I don't do this, he's going to do it to her anyway." The baby doll nodded, its padded arms flopping slightly as it gestured around the room. "He wait for right time. For her to grow. Then take her. Trap her. But you stop him. Swap with her. Get close. Find way to pull him out." I looked down at the page I'd torn from the journal, the words detailing the ritual glaring back at me like a cruel reminder of how all this had started. "And what happens to her?" I asked, my voice sharp. "If I take her body, what happens to Elizabeth?" The baby doll hesitated, its button eyes blinking slowly. "You bring her here," it said finally. "Keep her quiet. Safe? Then, when you win, you swap back. Give her body back to her." I stared at it, disbelief and anger bubbling inside me. "And what if I don't win? What if I fail?" The baby doll shifted again, its painted smile somehow conveying a deep sadness. "If you fail, she trapped anyway," it said quietly. "But if you don't try, she doomed. Ghost Alan. Take her. Use her. Forever." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. I clenched my tiny porcelain fists, my mind racing. The thought of taking Elizabeth's body, even temporarily, made me sick. It felt wrong, too close to what the ghost in Alan's body was doing to Stanley and everyone else. But the baby doll was right. If I didn't act, Elizabeth was going to lose her body anyway. And worse, she'd be trapped in a doll just like this one. I looked down at the page again, my porcelain hands trembling slightly. "If I do this," I said slowly, my voice tense, "it's not permanent. The moment I stop him, I'll bring her back here. I'll give her body back." The baby doll nodded, its button eyes fixed on me. "You save her," it said softly. "Better than leave her to him." I exhaled a hollow breath, my determination hardening. "I don't like this," I said, more to myself than to the baby doll. "But I don't see another choice." The baby doll leaned back slightly, its round, padded body slumping against the wall. "Then do it fast," it said. "Before he suspect." I folded the page carefully and tucked it into the torn remnants of my dress. I wasn't sure if I could live with myself for what I was about to do. But I was sure of one thing, I wasn't going to let Elizabeth suffer the same fate as the rest of us. I climbed back into the vent, the cold metal walls pressing against my porcelain body as I wriggled forward. Every movement was agonizingly slow and awkward, my joints creaking and the torn remnants of my dress snagging on the jagged edges. The page I had taken from the journal was tucked safely into the folds of my ruined outfit, the words of the incantation burning in my mind. It felt wrong, everything about this felt wrong, but I knew I didn't have another choice. The ghost in Alan's body would take Elizabeth eventually if I didn't act. This was the only way to save her. The vent finally opened into the office, and I slipped out as quietly as I could, landing on the carpeted floor with a soft clink. The room was empty, no sign of Alan, and I wasted no time making my way to the door. The hallway was eerily quiet, the soft glow of evening sunlight streaming through the windows. I moved as stealthily as possible, my small porcelain feet tapping faintly against the floor as I shuffled toward Elizabeth's room. When I reached the door, I paused, pressing my tiny ear against the wood. The sound of soft breathing came from inside. She's asleep, I thought, relief and guilt swirling in my chest. I pushed the door open just enough to slip inside, the hinges creaking slightly. Elizabeth's room was bathed in warm light from the setting sun, the pink walls and stuffed animals casting long shadows across the floor. There she was, lying peacefully in her bed. Her small chest rose and fell with each steady breath, her face calm and serene. I hesitated, standing at the foot of her bed, my tiny porcelain hands trembling. She's just a kid, I thought, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me. She doesn't deserve this. But neither did she deserve to be trapped in a doll, her life stolen by the same monster who had taken so much from everyone else. I climbed awkwardly onto the bed, the soft blanket sinking slightly under my weight. The closer I got, the more guilt clawed at me, but I forced myself to keep going. When I reached her head, I placed one porcelain hand gently on her forehead. Her skin was warm and soft, her face peaceful as she slept. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my hollow voice barely audible. "But this is the only way to protect you." I pulled the page from my dress, unfolding it carefully. The words of the incantation were scrawled in precise handwriting, their meaning heavy with power and intent. Taking a deep, hollow breath, I began to read. The words felt strange as they left my porcelain mouth, each syllable resonating with a faint, unnatural hum. The air around me seemed to shift, growing heavier with each passing moment. Elizabeth stirred slightly, her brow furrowing as if she could feel the energy building around her. I hesitated for a split second, guilt surging through me. But then I thought of Alan, of the monster who would take her body if I didn't act, and forced myself to keep going. The final words left my mouth, and the room fell deathly silent. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a sharp pull, like a current dragging me forward, yanked me out of the porcelain doll's body. The sensation was overwhelming, like being torn apart and reassembled in an instant. When I opened my eyes again, everything was different. I wasn't looking through the hollow, lifeless eyes of a doll anymore. I was in Elizabeth's body. Her small hands trembled as I lifted them in front of me, flexing her fingers. The softness of her skin, the warmth of her breath, it was all real. I looked down at the bed, where the porcelain doll I had been trapped in now lay motionless, its painted-on smile staring blankly at the ceiling. The switch had worked. I was in Elizabeth's body. And now, I had to finish what I'd started. Elizabeth stirred, her tiny porcelain hands twitching as she adjusted to her new body. Her button eyes blinked unnaturally, and her painted-on mouth twisted in an eerie attempt to mimic an expression. "What's happening?" she squeaked, her voice high-pitched and tinny, the hollow echo making it clear she was no longer human. She tried to move, but her movements were stiff and jerky, her tiny limbs struggling against the limitations of the doll's body. "What's going on? Why can't I feel anything?" I crouched down in her, my body, Elizabeth's hands raised in what I hoped was a calming gesture. "Elizabeth," I said gently, forcing her soft, childlike voice to sound soothing. "It's okay. You're safe. I promise." "Safe?" she cried, her button eyes darting around wildly. I'm a doll. What's happening to me?" I took a deep breath, or at least mimicked one,
and reached out, placing her small human hand gently on the doll's shoulder. "Listen to me," I said. "I know this is scary, but I need you to trust me. You're going to be back in your body soon. I'm taking you somewhere safe until I can fix this." Her porcelain head tilted up at me, her unblinking eyes filled with confusion and fear. "Fix this? How? How did this happen? What's going on?" I hesitated, guilt twisting in my chest. I couldn't tell her the truth, not yet. "There's someone dangerous," I said carefully. "Someone who would have hurt you if I hadn't stepped in. I had to move you somewhere safe, and this was the only way to protect you. But it's temporary, okay? I promise." Elizabeth's tiny hands clutched at the tattered fabric of her doll's dress, her movements clumsy and awkward. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "I just want to go back. Please, just let me go back." "I will," I said firmly. "But first, I need to get you to a safe place. Somewhere no one can hurt you." Her porcelain head turned slightly, her stiff movements making her seem even more fragile than I already knew she was. "Where?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with desperation. I stood, her small human body feeling heavier and warmer than I remembered after so long in the doll. "There's a place," I said, my voice steady. "A room where you'll be protected. No one will find you there. And once it's safe, I'll bring you back to your body. You just have to trust me." Elizabeth hesitated, her tiny hands clutching at her sides as if trying to hold herself together. "Oh okay," she said finally, her voice shaky but resigned. "But please hurry. I don't want to stay like this." "I'll fix this," I said softly, picking up her porcelain body as carefully as I could. Her tiny frame was light, her painted face frozen in a mix of fear and confusion. As I carried her toward the bedroom door, I steeled myself for what lay ahead. One step at a time, I thought. Get her to safety. Then take down the ghost that started this nightmare. Because no matter what it took, I wasn't going to let her suffer the same fate as me. I carefully pulled a hoodie from Elizabeth's wardrobe, slipping it over her small frame. The soft yellow dress she was wearing bunched awkwardly underneath, but the oversized hoodie concealed it well enough. I pulled the hood up to cover her face, knowing I'd need every bit of anonymity I could muster as I moved through the halls. Elizabeth, now trapped in the porcelain doll, sat quietly on the bed, her stiff little hands clinging to the tattered fabric of her dress. Her button eyes stared up at me, wide and unblinking, as I reached down and gently picked her up. Her tiny frame felt impossibly light in my hands, but the weight of what I had done hung heavily in the air between us. "Just stay quiet," I whispered, sliding her carefully into the large front pocket of the hoodie. "We'll be there soon, and you'll be safe." Elizabeth didn't respond, but I felt her shift slightly in the pocket, her movements stiff and jerky. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of her room and into the dimly lit hallway. The mansion was eerily quiet, the faint hum of distant machinery and the occasional creak of old floorboards the only sounds breaking the silence. I moved quickly but carefully, keeping my head down and my pace steady. The hoodie's loose fabric swayed slightly with each step, hiding Elizabeth's small porcelain form as I made my way toward the doll room. Every corner felt like a potential trap, every shadow a possible threat. I clutched the pocket tightly, my hands trembling slightly as I kept moving. A maid passed by at one point, her footsteps echoing softly in the corridor. I froze, my heart racing as she glanced in my direction. "Miss Elizabeth?" she asked, her tone polite but curious. I nodded quickly, keeping my head low. I'm just going to the kitchen," I said, forcing her soft, childlike voice to sound casual. The maid smiled and nodded, moving on without another word. I let out a shaky breath and kept going, my grip on the hoodie tightening. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached the hidden door that led to the doll room. I slipped inside, the air growing colder as the dim light of the room washed over me. The familiar sight of the dolls, porcelain, plastic, cloth, and more, greeted me, their lifeless eyes turning slowly toward me as I entered. The baby doll waddled forward from the corner, its round, padded body swaying awkwardly as it approached. "You?" Back, it said, its toddler-like voice halting and soft. I nodded, pulling Elizabeth's porcelain form from the pocket and holding her out. "She's here," I said quietly. "Take her. Keep her safe." The baby doll tilted its head, its button eyes blinking slowly as it gestured to two Barbie dolls nearby. They moved toward me, their jerky movements strangely coordinated as they reached for Elizabeth. "No," Elizabeth's tiny voice squeaked, her porcelain hands clutching at me. "I don't want to go with them." "It's okay," I said softly, lowering her into their waiting hands. "They'll take care of you. You'll be safe here." Elizabeth squirmed slightly, her stiff limbs jerking as the Barbie dolls carefully lifted her between them. The baby doll looked up at me, its painted-on smile somehow conveying a faint sadness. "We keep her safe," it said softly. "You do your part." I nodded, stepping back as they carried Elizabeth toward a quiet corner of the room. Her button eyes turned to look at me one last time, fear and confusion etched into her tiny porcelain form. "I'll come back," I promised, her small, childlike voice steady. "I'll fix this. I swear." The baby doll nodded once, its stitched mouth twitching slightly. "Good luck," it said simply. And with that, I turned and left the doll room, steeling myself for the battle ahead. It was time to end this. I was making my way cautiously toward Alan's office, Elizabeth's small body still covered by the oversized hoodie, when I heard heavy footsteps rushing toward me. Before I could react, something, or rather, someone, slammed into me, tackling me to the ground. The breath was knocked out of Elizabeth's lungs, and I winced, her soft hands instinctively reaching out to break the fall. My head fell back, and I looked up to see William towering over me, grinning like a predator. But something was wrong. His grin was twisted, far too wide, and his eyes gleamed with a malice that didn't belong there. "Gotcha," he sneered, his voice low and mocking. "Didn't think I'd let you waltz around the house without someone keeping an eye on you, did you?" I froze, staring up at him. There was something off about him, something cold and unnatural, like the aura of a ghost. "He's been possessed," I realized, the thought striking like lightning. But it wasn't the ghost controlling Alan. This was someone else. "William?" I asked, forcing Elizabeth's voice to sound confused and innocent. "Not quite," he said, the smirk deepening as he pulled a small, handheld device from his pocket. It was sleek and metallic, with glowing blue lines etched into its surface. William, or rather, the ghost inside him, pointed the strange, sleek device at me. Its metallic surface glimmered faintly, etched with glowing blue lines that pulsed like a heartbeat. "Do you know what this is, little thief?" he sneered, his voice dripping with malice. He held it up slightly, making sure I could see it clearly. "This is a ghost extractor. A clever little tool designed to do one thing: rip ghosts like you out of the bodies you've stolen." I froze, Elizabeth's small hands instinctively tightening into fists as he continued. "See, this baby here doesn't care how tightly you're clinging to her," he said, his grin widening. "The moment I press this button, it'll pull you out like a bad tooth. And once you're out," he chuckled darkly, "let's just say you'll regret ever crawling into that kid." The hum of the device grew louder, its glow intensifying as he pointed it directly at me. I could already feel a faint tug, like invisible fingers reaching for the edges of my presence. "Say goodbye," the ghost sneered, his thumb hovering over the button. But I wasn't about to let him win. As the device came closer, I waited for the perfect moment to strike. Just as he leaned in, confident and smug, I lunged, using Elizabeth's small frame to knock the extractor from his hand. William, or rather, the ghost inside him, pointed the device at me, its faint hum growing louder as it powered up. "You're not supposed to be in her, you little parasite," he growled. "Time to pull you out and send you where you belong." I scrambled backward, panic surging through Elizabeth's small body as the device's glow grew brighter. I could feel its pull already, a faint tug at the edges of my presence, like an invisible hand reaching for me. But I wasn't going to let him win. As he brought the device closer, I waited for the perfect moment. Just as he leaned down, I lunged, using Elizabeth's small frame to knock the device from his hand. It clattered to the floor, the glowing lines flickering as it spun out of reach. William let out a growl of frustration and lunged for the device, but I was faster. I grabbed it, Elizabeth's soft hands gripping it tightly as I rolled out of his reach. "Give that back!" he snarled, his voice laced with ghostly fury. "No chance," I shot back, aiming the device at him. His eyes widened as the extractor powered up, the hum building to a sharp, piercing whine. "Wait," he started, but it was too late. I pressed the button, and a burst of blue light shot out, engulfing William's body. He let out a guttural scream, his limbs thrashing as the ghost was forcibly ripped from him. The light coalesced into a writhing, transparent form, a muscular, angry-looking man who had clearly been a bodyguard in life. His spectral form glared at me, his ghostly mouth twisted into a snarl. "You'll regret this," he spat before the device sucked him in with a final whomp. The room fell silent, and William collapsed to the ground, unconscious but breathing. I stood there, breathing heavily, Elizabeth's small frame trembling as I stared at the extractor in my hands. It was mine now. And I was going to use it to end this nightmare for good. I gripped the ghost extractor tightly in Elizabeth's small hands, the hum of its faint energy still echoing in my ears. William lay unconscious behind me, but I didn't have time to check on him. I had to move, now. Using Elizabeth's memories as a guide, I darted down the hall, her small legs pumping as fast as they could. The mansion felt larger than ever, every hallway stretching endlessly, every turn more disorienting. But Elizabeth's memories were clear, burned into her mind from years of growing up in this labyrinth. Left, past the gallery. Right, past the grand staircase. Straight ahead to the west wing. Her dress fluttered as I ran, the soft fabric flipping and swishing in the wind I created. It caught at my knees, brushing against her white tights, but I ignored the discomfort. The hoodie I'd thrown on earlier billowed slightly behind me, its oversized sleeves flapping awkwardly. The sound of my small shoes echoed against the polished floors, but I kept moving, my grip on the extractor tightening with every step. "I'm almost there," I thought, determination surging through me. The door to Alan's office loomed ahead, the polished wood gleaming in the dim light of the hallway. My heart, or Elizabeth's, pounded in my chest as I reached for the handle, her small fingers wrapping around the cold metal. I hesitated for a split second, my mind racing with everything that could go wrong. Alan, the ghost in his body, wouldn't go down easily. He was cunning, powerful, and had been playing this game far longer than I had. But I didn't have a choice. I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking slightly as the room came into view. Alan stood at his desk, his back turned to me as he sifted through a stack of papers. His polished suit was immaculate, his posture calm and composed, but I could feel the unnatural energy radiating off him even from across the room. He froze as the door clicked shut behind me. Slowly, he turned, his cold eyes narrowing as they landed on me. "Elizabeth," he said smoothly, his tone deceptively warm. "What are you doing here?" I tightened my grip on the extractor, keeping it hidden behind Elizabeth's small frame. Her memories told me to tread carefully, Alan was always watching, always calculating. "I wanted to talk to you," I said, forcing her voice to sound soft and innocent. Alan's expression softened into a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He stepped closer, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Well, my angel, you should have knocked. Daddy's very busy." The word daddy sent a wave of revulsion through me, but I kept my composure. "I'm sorry," I said, taking a small step closer, her dress swishing faintly against her legs. I had a question." Alan's gaze flicked to the extractor in my hand, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What's that you've got there?" he asked, his voice still calm but laced with suspicion. My grip tightened, and I took another step forward, keeping Elizabeth's face calm and neutral. "It's a surprise," I said softly. Alan's smile faded, his sharp eyes locking onto mine as he took another step closer. For a moment, the room was silent, the tension crackling like a live wire. Then, in one fluid motion, I raised the extractor and pointed it directly at him. "Surprise," I said flatly. I raised the extractor and pointed it directly at him, my hands trembling slightly as I steadied Elizabeth's grip on the device. Alan froze, his sharp eyes narrowing as a shadow of something unfamiliar, fear, flickered across his face. He raised a hand, palm out, in a gesture of calm. "Stop," he said, his smooth, commanding voice breaking the silence. I didn't lower the device, my grip tightening as I glared at him. "Give me one good reason why I shouldn't use this right now." Alan's expression shifted, his sharp smile returning, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Because," he said slowly, taking a deliberate step closer, "don't you want to know why? Why I did this? Why I must do this?" I hesitated, the extractor humming faintly in my hands. Alan saw the pause and seized on it, his voice growing softer, more persuasive. "You've come this far," he said. "You've uncovered my secrets. But do you understand them? Do you know why I've gone to such lengths to preserve this life, to build this legacy?" I stayed silent, my jaw tightening as Elizabeth's small hands trembled against the weight of the device. Alan's smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. "I'll tell you," he said, his tone almost conspiratorial. "Because I want you to understand. I want you to see the bigger picture. And when you do, you'll know why there's no other way." I glared at him, my heart racing. Every instinct told me not to listen, not to give him the chance to manipulate me. But I couldn't deny the small, nagging voice in the back of my mind. I wanted to know. "Fine," I said, my voice low and tense. "You've got one chance. Talk." Alan's smile grew, and he gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit," he said smoothly. "This is going to take a moment." I didn't move, keeping the extractor trained on him. "I'll stand," I said sharply. Alan chuckled, his hands raised in mock surrender. "As you wish," he said, his tone light. "But I suggest you listen carefully. Because what I'm about to tell you will change everything you think you know." He leaned casually against the desk, his gaze fixed on me, and began to speak. Alan's expression shifted as he leaned against the desk, his sharp eyes narrowing with a mixture of menace and triumph. He folded his arms, his posture relaxed but brimming with confidence. "You see," he began, his voice smooth and deliberate, "this isn't just about me. It's never been just about me." I kept the extractor trained on him, my hands steady despite Elizabeth's small frame trembling. "Then what is it about? Why go to these lengths? Why ruin so many lives?" Alan smirked, tilting his head slightly as though I had just asked the most naive question imaginable. "Because this city," he said, gesturing widely with one hand, "is filled with ghosts. Millions of them, wandering unseen, clinging to the edges of existence. Lost souls, desperate for a second chance, for another shot at life." His words sent a chill through me. "You can feel them, can't you?" he asked, his piercing gaze locking onto mine. "You felt them brushing past you, whispering in the silence. This city is their graveyard, their purgatory. And I'm offering them salvation." I narrowed my eyes, my grip on the extractor tightening. "You mean you're offering them a way to steal other people's lives, just like you've been doing for decades?" Alan chuckled, shaking his head slowly. "You make it sound so crude," he said. "But think about it, millions of ghosts, trapped in limbo, while billions of living people squander their lives. I'm offering balance. A new order. A way for ghosts to live again." His smirk deepened, and he took a small step closer, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. "Do you know what my plan is?" he asked, his voice growing softer, more conspiratorial. "Why I've gone to such lengths to build this legacy, to gain this power?" I didn't answer, my jaw clenched as I waited for him to continue. "I'm going to become mayor," he said, his voice low and filled with conviction. "Once I do, I'll implement systems to make the city more ghost-friendly, let's call it. I'll identify ghosts who are loyal to me, those willing to serve my cause, and give them bodies to inhabit." My stomach churned, revulsion bubbling in my chest as he spoke. "You're insane," I said flatly. Alan ignored me, his tone growing more impassioned. From there, I'll expand. I'll become governor of New York State, then president. Imagine it, a government led by ghosts, an empire where the dead are given new life, their talents and wisdom preserved for eternity. Preserved? I shot back, my voice rising. You mean stolen? You're talking about taking people's lives, real, living people, and replacing them with ghosts who don't belong in those bodies. Alan's eyes gleamed with a dangerous intensity. And why not? He asked, his tone sharp. Why should the living waste the opportunities they've been given while the dead suffer in silence? The world needs leadership, vision, power, and ghosts like me can provide it. I've already built my foundation here in New York City. Soon, I'll grow my empire. And after that... He trailed off, his smirk widening as he gestured upward, as though the entire world were within his grasp. The rest of the world will follow. I stared at him, my mind racing as the enormity of his plan sank in. This wasn't just about him maintaining his stolen life, this was about domination. A global system where ghosts like him controlled everything, using the living as nothing more than vessels. You're a monster, I said, my voice trembling with fury. Alan tilted his head, his smirk never faltering. No, he said simply. I'm a visionary. I tightened my grip on the extractor, my resolve hardening. Not for long. Alan's expression shifted as he leaned against the desk, his sharp eyes narrowing with a mixture of menace and triumph. He folded his arms, his posture relaxed but brimming with confidence. You see, he began, his voice smooth and deliberate, this isn't just about me. It's never been just about me. I kept the extractor trained on him, my hands steady despite Elizabeth's small frame trembling. Then what is it about? Why go to these lengths? Why ruin so many lives? Alan smirked, tilting his head slightly as though I had just asked the most naive question imaginable. Because this city, he said, gesturing widely with one hand, is filled with ghosts. Millions of them, wandering unseen, clinging to the edges of existence. Lost souls, desperate for a second chance, for another shot at life. His words sent a chill through me. You can feel them, can't you? He asked, his piercing gaze locking onto mine. You felt them brushing past you, whispering in the silence. This city is their graveyard, their purgatory. And I'm offering them salvation. I narrowed my eyes, my grip on the extractor tightening. You mean you're offering them a way to steal other people's lives, just like you've been doing for decades? Alan chuckled, shaking his head slowly. You make it sound so crude, he said. But think about it, millions of ghosts, trapped in limbo, while billions of living people squander their lives. I'm offering balance. A new order. A way for ghosts to live again. His smirk deepened, and he took a small step closer, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. Do you know what my plan is? He asked, his voice growing softer, more conspiratorial. Why I've gone to such lengths to build this legacy, to gain this power? I didn't answer, my jaw clenched as I waited for him to continue. I'm going to become mayor, he said, his voice low and filled with conviction. Once I do, I'll implement systems to make the city more ghost-friendly, let's call it. I'll identify ghosts who are loyal to me, those willing to serve my cause, and give them bodies to inhabit. My stomach churned, revulsion bubbling in my chest as he spoke. You're insane, I said flatly. Alan ignored me, his tone growing more impassioned. From there, I'll expand. I'll become governor of New York State, then president. Imagine it, a government led by ghosts, an empire where the dead are given new life, their talents and wisdom preserved for eternity. Preserved? I shot back, my voice rising. You mean stolen? You're talking about taking people's lives, real, living people, and replacing them with ghosts who don't belong in those bodies. Alan's eyes gleamed with a dangerous intensity. And why not? He asked, his tone sharp. Why should the living waste the opportunities they've been given while the dead suffer in silence? The world needs leadership, vision, power, and ghosts like me can provide it. I've already built my foundation here in New York City. Soon, I'll grow my empire. And after that... He trailed off, his smirk widening as he gestured upward, as though the entire world were within his grasp. The rest of the world will follow. I stared at him, my mind racing as the enormity of his plan sank in. This wasn't just about him maintaining his stolen life, this was about domination. A global system where ghosts like him controlled everything, using the living as nothing more than vessels. "You're a monster," I said, my voice trembling with fury. Alan tilted his head, his smirk never faltering. "No," he said simply. "I'm a visionary." I tightened my grip on the extractor, my resolve hardening. "Not for long." Alan's smirk twisted into something darker, his cold eyes locking onto me as he straightened from his casual lean against the desk. The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows deepening around him as the air filled with an unnatural tension. "You think you can stop me?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "You're out of your depth, little ghost. You're in a child's body. Do you really think you have a chance against me?" I gritted Elizabeth's teeth, leveling the extractor at him. "You've been taking lives for decades," I said, her small voice trembling but firm. "It ends here." Alan's chuckle was deep and menacing, like the rumble of distant thunder. "Bold words," he said, his posture shifting slightly. His confidence didn't falter for a second. "But let's see how far you get." Before I could react, Alan moved. 1 second, he was standing behind the desk. The next, he was in front of it, closing the distance between us in an instant. His movements were unnaturally fast, a blur of inhuman speed that sent a chill racing down my spine. I fired the extractor instinctively, the blue energy arcing toward him in a crackling wave. But Alan was ready. He twisted his body, dodging the blast with an eerie grace that seemed almost effortless. The energy hit the wall behind him, leaving a blackened scorch mark on the wood. "Too slow," he taunted, his voice echoing faintly as he circled me like a predator. I backed away, Elizabeth's small frame trembling as I tried to keep the extractor steady. My hands felt clumsy and weak compared to his towering presence, but I refused to let him see my fear. "You're not as strong as you think," I said, trying to buy time. Alan's smirk widened, his dark aura radiating with a suffocating intensity. "Oh, I'm much stronger than you realize," he said. "And you've made a grave mistake coming here." He lunged again, faster than I could react, his hand grabbing the extractor. We struggled for control, Elizabeth's small body straining against his supernatural strength. The room was a blur of movement, the sound of our battle echoing off the walls. I slammed Elizabeth's knee into his shin, using her slight size and speed to slip out of his grasp. Alan growled, his control slipping for just a moment, and I saw a flicker of something, pure, ghostly rage, in his eyes. "You're nothing but a parasite," he snarled, his voice distorted with a faint, unnatural echo. "Do you really think you can stand against me? Against this?" His aura surged outward, a wave of dark energy that sent me crashing into the wall. Elizabeth's small frame crumpled to the ground, pain radiating through her body as I struggled to push myself back up. Alan stalked toward me, his presence looming. "This is the end for you," he said, his voice cold and final. But I wasn't done yet. I scrambled to my feet, gripping the extractor tightly as I ducked under his next swipe. With a desperate twist, I managed to fire another blast, the blue energy grazing his arm. Alan howled, the energy tearing into his stolen body like fire. For the first time, his confidence faltered, his expression twisting into something primal and angry. "You're going to regret that," he growled, his voice dripping with venom. I didn't respond. There was no time for words. This was it, a fight for survival, for Elizabeth, for everyone Alan had ever hurt. And I wasn't going to lose. Alan snarled, his rage twisting his stolen face into a grotesque mask of hatred. But I didn't hesitate. I fired the extractor again, the blue energy crackling as it shot forward and struck him square in the chest. The impact sent him stumbling backward, his body convulsing as the light from the extractor wrapped around him like chains. "No!" Alan screamed, his voice echoing unnaturally as his ghostly essence began to tear free from the body it had stolen. His rage-filled cry reverberated through the room, shaking the walls and rattling the desk. The stolen body of Alan Yates collapsed to the ground, lifeless and empty, as the true ghost of Alan rose above it, a twisted, transparent form wreathed in dark, writhing shadows. His face was distorted with fury, his glowing eyes locked onto me with pure, unbridled hatred. "You think this is over?" the ghost bellowed, his voice distorted and inhuman. "You think you've won?" I staggered back, Elizabeth's small body trembling as the ghost's rage-filled aura surged through the room. Papers flew from the desk, the lights flickered wildly, and the air itself seemed to grow heavier, suffocating. Alan's ghost twisted toward me, his incorporeal form coiling like a serpent ready to strike. "You don't know what you've done!" he screamed. "I'll rip you apart! I'll..." But before he could finish, the room grew unbearably hot, the temperature rising in an instant. The floor beneath him began to glow, fiery cracks spreading outward like veins. The ground shook violently, and with a deafening roar, the floor split open, revealing a fiery, churning pit of molten light. The ghost froze, his twisted face contorting with fear and disbelief. "No! No!" he howled, his form beginning to flicker and pull downward as the infernal force beneath him took hold. A deep, guttural growl echoed from the pit, like the sound of 1,000 tortured souls wailing in unison. Black chains of fire shot upward from the depths, wrapping around the ghost form and yanking him downward. "This isn't over!" Alan's ghost screamed, his voice growing faint as the chains dragged him closer to the fiery abyss. "I'll come back! You can't stop me!" The last of his words were drowned out as the pit swallowed him whole, the flames surging upward in a final, blinding flash before the floor sealed shut. The room fell silent. I stood there, Elizabeth's small chest heaving as I stared at the spot where Alan's ghost had disappeared. The extractor in my hands felt heavier now, its faint hum fading into silence. It was over. Alan Yates, the ghost who had stolen lives, who had destroyed so many, was gone. And this time, he wasn't coming back.